and welcome to the Sci-AI podcast. This is episode number 19. Today, my guest is Peter Voss. This is his second time on the podcast, and it is a great honor and privilege to have him on the podcast today. Peter is a pioneer in the field of artificial general intelligence and conversational AI. His company, Aigo.ai, is building the strongest of AGIs in the form of conversational AI, or in simpler terms, the chatbot with a brain. His company is implementing the third wave of AI, using cognitive architectures, providing highly intelligent, hyper-personalized assistants that have deep understanding of natural language, have short and long-term memory, learn interactively, use context, and are able to reason and hold meaningful ongoing conversations. How cool is that? So let's go ahead and get started with Peter. Thank you, Peter, for coming again onto the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun last time.
Yes, absolutely. We learned a lot from you, and we found some more questions to ask you then. All right. So my first question, Peter, is about my favorite topic that kind of came out from our last discussion, is about these philosophical terms. How do we teach ontology and epistemology? Can machines ever be ontologically and epistemologically aligned to us? I'm sorry, it's a long question. And if that is the case, then if we don't have foolproof evidence of how intelligent life started on our planet, then does it mean someone from other part of the universe had actually given us this intelligence like we are slowly and steadily giving it to machines? So what do you think?
Yes, from my perspective, I don't think there's really any strong evidence that intelligence came, anywhere other than through evolution. That basically,
Right.
we can follow the progress of intelligence as animals evolved. So I think it's pretty clear that, initially there was very simple stimulus response mechanisms that evolution, created. And those became ever more sophisticated. And the big leap between the higher animals and humans, and what makes human intelligence so uniquely powerful, is that we are able to form abstract concepts. Whereas, roughly speaking, and it's not a totally binary thing, but roughly speaking, animals can only form concepts that are directly linked to perception. So what they perceive, if they perceive different objects, a food bowl or a tree or an elephant or whatever it might be, if they see them or have other sensation, whether it's smell or sound or whatever it might be, they can basically form those concepts and say, well, this is something that's good for me, or that's something I can eat, or something that might eat me, and basically categorize different things like that. And with humans, we are able to form concepts of concept, really in an unlimited way. And, that's what abstract concepts are. And we can end up with extremely abstract things like government or marriage or honesty or, things like that, which are several levels high. So I don't think there's any evidence that, all the evidence points at that, evolution created the intelligence that we have. Now, as far as computers being able to acquire the ontology, as you said, or epistemology, the ability to learn, like humans, I think they need to be seeded with certain learning mechanisms. I mean, we are born with certain feature extraction, with certain ability to learn fundamentally. That's in our DNA. And then interacting with the environment, and this is where nurture comes in, basically, we develop this intelligence fully, as we interact with the world, and, for humans, having teachers, being able to read books and so on. So similarly, computers will need to have the innate ability to learn at a certain level. But that can be kind of a bootstrapping device, that innate ability that we need to build into the AIs can then lead the system to learn and form these abstract concepts and learn similar to the way humans do. Now, we can vastly accelerate that learning process, of course, by immersing them in virtual worlds that are sped up, or even force feeding frameworks. They can read Wikipedia and so on. So the learning process can happen much quicker, but ultimately they need to have those same advanced abstract concepts in their mind, in their architecture, in their mind, to be able to reason abstractly. And, at that point, basically, they will have the same ability to learn and reason, and basically the epistemology that you're talking about, and to build an ontology, to refine the ontology as they interact with the world.
That's fantastic. But then does it mean that it would take a long time to sort of do that for machines? Or do you think it's a step-by-step process? And is there enough research going on today in this regard?
Yeah. So, no, there's not enough research going on. Almost all of the research that's being done in AI is deep learning, machine learning, which is basically building statistical models, which are completely different. It's really the opposite of what you want. You want systems that can learn interactively and refine their models as they learn interactively. Even reinforcement learning, which sort of comes somewhat close to that, isn't really the right thing. It's a very small part of where we use reinforcement learning, in the kind of high-level intelligence that we're interested in. Now, how long it should take, it's really depending on how good your kernel, the core mechanism is. And there's a lot of attempts and iterations one has to go through to build the machine that has the capacity to learn, by hitting the books, by, reading things, by talking to people, by potentially having sensors, being able to see the world, maybe being embodied in a robot or in a virtual robot. So it depends on how powerful the core machinery is. But apart from that, the acquiring knowledge really can happen very, very quick. I just went to this year's AGI conference a few weeks back, and, one of the speakers made the case and was totally convinced that the only way to build AGI is that it needs to be raised like an infant, like a child,
like a baby,
and like a baby, and there's no shortcut that, it's going to take you 18 years. Now, to me, that seems completely implausible. That thing. First of all, how do you debug it? How do you get you're going to have many attempts. There are a million ways of getting it wrong for every one way of getting it right. So you're going to have to run a lot of experiments, and to get those learning mechanisms to be correct, to get the curriculum to be effective, to have the scaling working, whatever hardware issues you may have, and so on. So and I see absolutely no reason why the learning process itself can't be sped up, thousands of times from human learning.
But how can that be sped up? Like you said, 1,000 times.
Well,
how is it?
First of all, by reading. Obviously, a computer could ingest Wikipedia, at 1,000 times or 1,000,000 times the speed that we could. In fact, we couldn't. We couldn't read it. But even to that's pretty clear. Once you have the mechanism for reading and comprehending there's no particular reason to think why you couldn't speed that up. In fact, we're already seeing that. They even in the sort of primitive proto-AGI that we have now, they can read many times faster than a human can and ingest knowledge. So clearly they'll be able to learn much quicker. Now, learning to interact with the world, that can, a lot of that learning can happen in a virtual world. And again, the virtual world, of course, can be sped up. Doesn't have to operate at human timescales. To believe that you can't speed that up significantly in a virtual world environment. And then the final experience of interacting with humans, of course, has to happen in the real world. But that's assuming you already have this massive amount of background knowledge available, and the interaction with humans to sort of learn things at human speed. And real world speed, that might be a few weeks worth or a few months worth, of additional training that you need. But you can also do that in parallel once you have a system trained up with all the core knowledge that you need, you can make 1,000 copies of it, and you could have 1,000 different people train it with the real world sort of pace, as it were.
Makes sense. Yes. Great. Thank you. I read one of your blogs, and you've rightly asked this question in that does an AGI or a general intelligence need to be conscious? Can I then ask you, if it is not conscious, then can it be more intelligent than us? Because as per me, our intelligence is because of what we perceive around us by our senses: vision, comprehension, imagination, creativity, pain, grief, etc. So can you please talk about that? And you also use the term qualia there, if you can also elaborate on that.
Yes. So the word consciousness, of course, it has a lot of different meanings. Marvin Minsky calls it a suitcase word, because there are all these different ideas that are thrown into a suitcase, and then somebody puts a label on it, consciousness, So to understand consciousness, you have to open the suitcase and unpack it and sort of, say, well, what does each piece mean? So to talk about what I consider the most important aspect of consciousness for intelligence, or for AGI, is self-awareness. And I think that's what a lot of people mean by consciousness. Are you conscious about what you're doing? Are you conscious about your actions? Are you conscious about the implications of what you're doing? Now, that requires a self-awareness. The AI needs to be able to conceptualize itself as an agent acting in the world. So it needs to have a self-concept. It needs to have this concept of, this is what I am causing in the world to happen. And it'll also have awareness of its thought processes, of its cognitive processes to some extent. Similar to us, but actually quite a bit more than we have. We don't have a lot of access to our thought processes. So an AI will have, more access to its thought process. So it has to be self-aware to be intelligent, or to put it another way, self-awareness will be a byproduct of high-level intelligence, of abstract conceptual intelligence. So it's not a question of can we have human-level intelligence without awareness, self-awareness, or consciousness? No, we can't. Now, you can have narrow AI that can, play Go or chess or do anything like that without self-awareness, but you can't have an AGI that can actually do really generally useful things in the world without being aware of itself as an agent and conceptualizing that. So that's sort of the simple answer. Now, the qualia question, I think there's, in my mind, there's just a lot of confusion about, philosophers can introduce sort of new terms and make them seem really plausible and important. And there isn't necessarily such a big mystery in it. So it's like paradoxes, some of the paradoxes, the sentence is not true, and philosophers have spent, whole careers trying to make sense of it, when in reality, the answer to that is actually pretty simple. It's, the philosopher tying themselves into knots. And qualia, in my opinion, is sort of that nature. When you, for example, what a lot of people use the reference, what does it feel like to be now, it sounds, on the surface, it sounds like a legitimate question or an important question, but it really isn't, because if you compare that now to somebody saying, if you're male and you say, what does it feel to be pregnant?
Right.
So you can converse, you can talk to women who are pregnant or have been pregnant, and you can get some idea, and they might, tell you it's like having indigestion or whatever it is. I haven't had that conversation.
Right.
So, and so you have some kind of a general sense then of what it is, but you can't experience it yourself. So it's basically trying to describe the experience to somebody else that is personal of that. So, and that's really what qualia is. What does it feel like to see red? Well,
Right.
It feels, it's different from seeing blue.
Yes.
And if you're colorblind, well, you're not going to have that experience. And, you assume that the experience of seeing red is reasonably similar for people who can see red, but the overall experience can be different. I mean, there may be emotions attached to seeing red, literally.
Right.
So, there isn't more to the mystery. You're just trying to explain the personal experience you have of something to somebody else, and their limitations in doing that. And that's sort of the mystery of qualia. There isn't really more to it.
So then, can my conscious or my self-awareness be different from a machine? They can have a self-awareness as well. They can be conscious as well, but they might not have the same kind of self-awareness. I don't know how to put that in words, but
yes, of course,
yeah.
it will be very different. Of course,
Right.
it will be different. Unless we specifically build in a heartbeat, for example, they're not going to have a heartbeat. They're not going to feel sweating. They're not going to. I mean, there's this whole wide range of physical sensations that we have as part of our self-awareness, and they're not going to have that. And if we build it in somehow, it's going to be different from the biological experience anyway. And why would we bother building it in?
Right.
So of course their experience of their consciousness will be very, very different from.
And more than biological, I was also thinking maybe something which is more like a thought or a comprehension, which is like, I cannot do anything wrong. As a human, I know that I can do wrong because I cannot calculate something which is coming in the next 1 or 2 days by so much accuracy that a machine can. So, I mean, their comprehension or their self-awareness of what they can actually achieve might be completely different from ours. And that might be, yeah.
Yes, it will be, but not actually as nearly as much as you think, because one of the things that we've already discovered in sort of our scientific endeavors and mathematical endeavors development is that most things in reality are not predictable.
Right.
And the reason they're not predictable is A, chaos theory, and B, quantum mechanics. And it's not just that they're not predictable because we can't calculate enough. They are inherently not predictable. You can even have relatively simple formulas that the only way you can get the outcome of that is by running the formula, by running the algorithm. And there is absolutely no way of predicting what the results will be without actually running it. So we know that. We know that now. So we know that, in reality, things are not predictable in the real world. And an AI will know that. So yes, certainly, things that are mathematical, that can be calculated, that don't fall into that realm. Yes, of course, but that's really not that much different from a human who's an expert in a certain field and, who can rattle off, I don't know, the different chemical elements, or who's an expert at playing piano or guitar or something,
right.
and they can tell you exactly what chord they're playing or what chord progression and so on without having to think about it, and to people who don't have that ability, that might seem like magic. So they'll be very confident that they can do that. So in a similar way, in AGI will be confident, and I don't even have to put confident in scare quotes, because there will really be metacognition. There has to be metacognition within an AI of the degree of certainty on something. That's an important aspect of knowing when you don't know something, or knowing when you can solve something, or knowing when you're not sure that you can solve something. Because you don't want to waste your time doing something that is impossible, or you want to have the confidence that you can do something if you know that that's within your capability.
Right. Fantastic. Great answer. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, there was one more thing that you've talked about in one of your articles was the 5 steps of building the right AGI. Can you please share with us again, something that I read about heuristic and exploratory research? And
Yeah, let me just have
Sure.
a look at that again, because I wrote
Yes.
that some time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the particular article you're talking about is really talking about Pat Langley, who wrote a great
Pat
book
Langley's, yes.
on cognitive architectures, and that really resonated with me. Now, in my article, I rephrase, the steps that he has, and going through them. It's high level cognition, such abilities such as abstract reasoning, deep comprehension, and so on, is an essential requirement of intelligence. So that seems pretty obvious. But again, deep learning, machine learning systems don't have that.
Right.
So it's a requirement. The second thing, structured representation. The knowledge that you have needs to be stored in the system that it's usable and accessible for reasoning. And ideally, if it's scrutable as well, then for the designer, it's obviously more useful if you can actually make sense of the information that's stored. But you do need to store information in some kind of a structured representation that it can, fit together and create hierarchies, and you can reason about it. Third one was system level approach. You need an integrated architecture, and that's very important, that the different components of cognition, for example, if we're doing a lot of work with natural language processing, if you're having a conversation, the parsing, the whatever ability you have to parse a sentence, that needs to be deeply integrated with your knowledge representation and with your reasoning ability and so on, disambiguation and all of that. So the short-term memory, long-term memory, context, all of those have to work together. So that's kind of the system level approach. Heuristics and satisficing, I think that's another very important aspect that deep learning, machine learning doesn't really address, is you need to be able to do things in real time with limited resources, limited time, limited memory. Whereas in deep learning, it's often, if it takes the amount of electricity that Manhattan uses in a week, and it takes 2 months to run the algorithm, well, so be it. If it costs us $10 million or $50 million to, run this algorithm and create the model, so be it. Real intelligence, general intelligence, can't be like that. It has to be able to deal with situations with limited knowledge, limited resources, time and compute, because it has to be able to react in real time. Links to human cognition, I mentioned that briefly, but things like metacognition are essential, while emotions like fear and anger are probably not required, or not. The system only needs to be able to recognize them, but not necessarily have them itself. Whereas other metacognitive emotions are required, such as uncertainty. If the system is not certain about the knowledge it has or how to go about solving it, it needs to have a signal for that. Boredom, if it's trying to learn something and it's in a loop, it needs to get bored. Surprise, if something unexpected happens, that's an important signal, because you probably want to dig deeper, So those kind of metacognitive emotions are essential as well. And then exploratory research. Yeah, okay. There he makes the point, basically, is we should be focusing not on narrow AI, but on AGI, on building systems that can learn generally, that can reason, that have all of these attributes that he mentioned, and that we really need to experiment. We need to do the work. We need to, actually build systems like that. And that's not really, hardly anybody is working on that. So, I found his points very insightful, and that's kind of why I wrote an article on that.
Yeah, me too. That's why I was very interested in learning from you more about it. And the fifth point, the last one, was really something that as not a very deep AI person, I kind of liked it, the exploratory research. And then, the other ones are something that, are completely amazing, and wanted to ask you that. Right. Great. So my next question to you is, why do we need a device for a chatbot? Can't this be integrated to our brains with a device? The most intelligent conversational AI that you and your team is building at Aigo, is it possible to have that integrated with the device in the brain, like Neuralink that Elon Musk is building? Or am I completely thinking in a very, very different domain?
Yeah, so it could be, but I think we also need to sort of separate the hype from reality.
Right.
Neuralink is very advanced technology. There's some great breakthroughs in terms of the equipment they've developed to streamline and automate things. So I think that's definitely an advance. And there's certainly some experiments where you can show people the thoughts being able to activate certain external signals and so on. In terms of receiving information externally, I think that's a lot more difficult to stimulate the right kind of things, to know how to input information.
Right.
So first of all, that technology, Neuralink technology, to think about it of actually having a two-way conversation routinely, I think it's a long way away. And I could give a long list of reasons of why I think it's a long way away compared to building AGI. But I'll just use the one sort of deal breaker, and that's FDA.
Oh, right.
A device like that has to be FDA approved.
Approved, yeah.
And we know how long that takes. I mean, for general use, it's going to be decades away. I'm confident that we will have human level AI in a much shorter time period like that.
Okay.
Now, also Neuralink is not really going to overcome the speed at which you can communicate significantly, because our wetware, our brain inherently is not going to be able to absorb information, at 10 times or 100 times the speed. So Neuralink could feed us the information quicker, but we're not really going to significantly improve the speed. I mean, there may be some improvement that that as you form your thoughts, they can already be transmitted without speaking them. So there might be some speed up, but it's not going to be very significant. So what I see more practically, what we're going to have way before that is human level assistance. That think of it as a Siri or Alexa on steroids, but that's going to be closely coupled to us, that we will use all the time. That basically will, and what I call that psychological coupling. And what I mean by that is, if we use these devices all the time, and they're really big, this personal assistant or artificial AI, artificial intelligence, they will become part of us psychologically. Initially it will be a separate device, and you ask it for, to look up, I don't know, the weather tomorrow or the stock price or latest news or whatever. And it'll tell you that, and it'll be very clear that, you are asking the question, it's going out, getting the information, and it's coming back. But over time, as it gets to know more and more about you and your preferences and how you communicate, it'll come closer and closer to the ways some married couples are, for example, that have been married for a long time, where they kind of share thoughts. They can finish each other's sentences. Right. And when they make a decision, they don't actually know, well, whose idea was this? And it may not matter. And so I see this AI, being this little angel on your shoulder that can give you good advice, but it'll actually almost become part of you. It'll be, or another way to look at it is, it's an exocortex. It's an extension to your brain, even without it being physically connected. That's what I mean by psychological coupling.
And it will not overwhelm us. Like you said, when it comes to Neuralink, the output is okay, but the input, our brains might not be able to, process it. So when you say about this device or, getting psychologically coupled to us, would we be able to handle it from a bandwidth perspective?
Well, I mean, it would still have to operate at whatever speed our brain, and we'd be communicating with it, largely through language, maybe subvocal or, and eventually some Neuralink. There are also some initiatives that are not actually embedded in the brain, where you wear a skull cap or, with electrodes that can communicate with your brain. So that might be possible. But I mean, clearly for it to be useful, it has to operate at your pace, at our wetware's pace. Now, it can go off and, so for example, you might look for a new job, or whether you want to partner with somebody, start a business with somebody. So you could ask your personal assistant, does this make sense? Getting involved with this person or taking this job, and of course the AI could go off and at lightning speed, read all of the relevant material, background material, about the person or about the position or whatever, and then come back and say, well, I think this is a great idea. This and this and this. These are all the fantastic things. Just watch out for this point and that point.
Right.
And it could very quickly give you a summary, but that summary would still have to come to you at the pace at which you can ingest it. And but then you could ask clarifying questions. And you can say, well, explain that to me, or why do you say that?
Right.
But the research could be done at lightning speed then by the AI.
Fantastic. Yes, great. Thank you. So I read somewhere, on I think New York Times article or somewhere, and it was mentioned that our brain is a computer with consciousness. Do you believe in that? If not, then what is your critique for it?
Right. So, yeah, in fact, I've recently come across this article that was published, I think, in 2015. Originally, Your Brain is Not a Computer. That was an article that got a lot of mileage. And Gary Marcus replied to it, actually, yes, our brain is a computer. And there were a couple of other refutations of that article. And I'm definitely on the side that it's not unreasonable to think of our brains as a computer. It computes. Of course, it's a very different computer from the computers we have, on our desks or in our phones or wherever. It's a massively parallel computer, and it's biological. It changes its structure, its actual physical structure, with the knowledge that it has. So it's a very, very different animal. Yes, I think it's it's a reasonable analogy to make. One just mustn't take it too far,
Right. Good. Yeah, I also believe that, and I've read it at so many places as well, that believing that it is a computer with consciousness is not a wrong thing. But I mean, there are obviously some opposition to it as well. Some people don't like it.
Yeah, I mean, the question is, what else would it, what else would it be? I mean, clearly people who believe that, you have a soul, or that there's some other magic in consciousness, that isn't explained by the action of our neurons. If, people believe that, then I can understand that they would not agree with calling it a computer, that there's, some other pixie dust, that's involved to make us think. But clearly I don't believe that.
Great. Thank you. So a very hypothetical kind of thought-provoking question. If we put an AGI, like a machine, secluded from everything, let's imagine we send him to moon, this machine. Can it learn by itself by just observing the sky, the ground, the atmosphere around it? No learning data around it. So if there is no relevant data, then does it mean that in the future, the biggest of tech companies like the Metaverse today, or Google, or others, can monopolize data because they know that in order to build the powerful of AGIs, they can actually sort of monetize it in the best way possible for their benefits. So what do you think? Is it possible, or?
Yeah, they're really two separate questions. Let me maybe take the second one first. Can the big companies that have access to the most data monopolize everything? So we already seeing that you have these huge models that are being built, GPT-3 and beyond, that have trillions of parameters, and have 1,000 times or million times, probably million times, the number of books that even a highly educated person reads that they have.
Right.
And they have no real intelligence. I mean, they make, really bad blunders because they really don't understand and they don't think. So having a lot of data is not really by itself a huge advantage. Now, in certain things, it clearly is. I mean, if you have Google Maps and you have all of that information of mapping, and you've spent, decades collecting it, and you have cars driving around collecting this information and so on, that's extremely useful information to have. And you can sell that to other people. But there's a big difference between knowledge and intelligence. Having a lot of knowledge is not at all the same as having intelligence. So companies having access to a lot of knowledge, unless they, to the extent that they can lock it up, that they can prevent people from getting at that data, of course, it's a competitive advantage, but it's not required for intelligence at all, for human or superhuman level intelligence. So, let me turn that around now and say, well, if we are looking for the intelligence of, say, a cancer researcher, a top cancer researcher, or could be in any field. It could be in nanotechnology. It could be in climate. It could be, political. It could be, but say a top researcher in that field. Now, clearly the knowledge required to get to that level of competence is available. It's freely available. I mean, it's available in books and people who can teach you the stuff and, on the internet and so on. So building an AI that has that level of expertise and thinking ability is quite separated from what the big companies control. It doesn't, that information is available. And that once you have that, you now have one top level, PhD level beyond cancer researcher AGI, you can make, million copies of it. Absolutely. And now you have a million of these cancer researchers that can pursue different paths and different ideas and so on. And you can do the same now in, whatever field you want. So no, I don't see, see the big companies, what they're doing is narrow AI, and the data that they have to, to optimize clicks, advertising or whatever.
Right.
Yes, they'll have a monopoly on that, but that's not intelligence. That's, narrow AI. Very powerful and very profitable, but it's not AGI.
That's great. Great answer. Thank you. Now let's go to a little bit of philosophical questions again. How would we live in the future with intelligent machines? Do you think we will still be in command, or the authority lies with them, as per the common agreement with all the countries of the world? How do you see the future of AI then?
Yeah, I think that there's a general confusion that people assume that once you have intelligence, once you have human level intelligence, you will automatically have kind of a human ego and human drives, to do things. And I don't think that follows at all. We have evolution obviously built us and animals, way down the evolutionary chain, basically with a reptile brain, going back that and even before that, for survival and reproduction. Those are the big drivers for us. Now, in humans, they've sort of got a veneer of sophistication over that, that we have through civilization, that it's not just all rape and pillage, So we clearly have a measure of control over our reptile brain, but it's still driving us. I mean, that's what, is still behind the scenes driving ego, our ego satisfaction, what's important to us and so on. And clearly our upbringing has a part in that, but, also our inherent genetic makeup, because if people are not motivated to reproduce, well, those genes are going to die out. And if they're not motivated to, protect themselves and feed themselves, which, for most of human existence was hard, which usually meant you had to conquer somebody or fight somebody, whether it's animal or other humans.
Mm-hmm.
So AIs aren't going to have, they are not going to have that reptile brain. They are not going to have that built-in desire to reproduce or to survive. We're not going to build them like that. I mean, you could build something like that, but why would you?
Right.
It doesn't make sense. A, it doesn't make sense. And B, those are not going to be the ones that you can sell to other people. You know, who wants to buy a personal robot that has its own agenda and wants to reproduce itself? You know, that's kind of, or, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
So they are not going to inherently have those drives. And, you know, to the extent that they're self-aware, they will be aware of the fact that, hey, I'm an AI built by humans, and I do stuff for humans that humans want. So I don't see where that motivation would come in. I think it's just people, you know, misreading human characteristics into AI. It's not, to me, it's not at all likely. In fact, I think it's pretty, let me leave it at that. It's extremely unlikely that intelligence by itself will create, you know, sort of a desire to want to do something by yourself.
So they may have different goals than us. Why would they have the similar kind
Well,
of
basically what I'm saying, their goals will be to do what we want them to do. They'll be our goals. You know, they are not going to have their own goals, because where would those goals come from? You know, our goals come from essentially from our reptile brain.
Right. True.
You know, that's what motivates us ultimately. It's you know, what gives us emotional satisfaction and so on. And in AIs, that's just what, you know, what satisfies them is basically doing the tasks that we ask them.
Then can we stretch it a little bit more? We as humans may not have the similar kind of goals, but like you said, the reptilian brain and, you know, survival and reproduction. So, but we still have, almost all of us, same kind of goal: survive, eat, you know, live, breathe, and all that, and prosper. But I mean, when it comes to machines, will they be able to then have different kind of goals amongst themselves? Because the reason why I'm saying it is they are also not dumb. Like, they'll be intelligent, they'll be able to make decisions by themselves. And they might say, okay, the humans might have built us, but now I have the capability of doing something of thinking of something of my own. So I may not want to live on this planet, but I want to explore the other universe. How can I do that? Let me build, you know, paper clips, or, you know, let me try and do something else. Yeah. So
no, I think that's the point I just wanted to make, is they are not going to, I don't see any reason why they would have create their own goals. You know, I mean, sort of like, say they get together and say, what do we really want to do? I don't see that at all. Also, don't forget my model, the way I see AI coming about, is very much through what I call a personal assistant. And I don't know if we spoke about that last time, but you know, the personal assistant is basically, the reason we double up on the word personal, it should really be personal. Personal assistant is the three different meanings of personal. A, you own it. And, you know, it serves your agenda, not some mega corporations. Secondly, it's personal, that it's highly customized to you. It knows your preferences and so on. And the third personal is that it's private, that it will only share information that you wanted to share with whoever you want to share information with. So if people, you know, if individuals have these personal assistants, those assistants basically live for assisting you. That's their purpose in life. You know, and we just look at this from sort of human perspective and say, well, it's a slave or something, you know, but it simply doesn't apply the same time. You know, emotionally we can use words like that, you know, but it's like saying, you know, I'm a slave working for this company, you know, they only pay me $400,000 a year, you know, but I'm a slave, you know, and people make those ridiculous statements, you know, and of course that totally undermines what real slavery is. So no, I don't, you know, I don't see that AIs will have an agenda other than the purpose they were built for.
Okay, good. Yes, thank you for that answer as well. So my next one is, are we really alive? Like, how do we know that we are really here at this moment? How do we know by certainty that we are not in a simulation, but we are actually existing here?
Well, there's sort of a snarky answer that I can give. The reason we know we're not in a simulation, that any civilization smart enough to, advanced enough to build a simulation that we're in, couldn't possibly play out the stupidity that humans exhibit right now. If you look at our political landscape, or if you look at any number of things that I could point to, certainly no advanced civilization would waste their time running simulations as stupid as this.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's not completely a snarky answer. It's sort of actually,
No, it is a good one.
I think a data point
Yes.
one can use. But, ultimately, it's the whole idea of talking about, are we in a simulation, that to me smacks so much of people who maybe aren't religious and more and are still looking for some kind of a God, that whoever's running the simulation. But it's really a non-answer, because then, okay, whoever's running the simulation, are they in a simulation? It's like
Right.
turtles all the way down. It doesn't answer anything at all. Even speculating that, is there something outside of the known universe, that has access to what's happening in this universe seems extremely unlikely. But, if anybody can find the trapdoor, and communicate with something outside of the universe with, sort of the outer shell, the command center, or whatever you want to call it. But, as I say, it doesn't answer any question, because then why wouldn't that be a simulation at some higher level? And it doesn't get you anywhere. It really makes no sense. And as I say, really my first comment is, no, it's our existence, our lives are way too stupid for an advanced civilization to run this simulation.
Right. I agree. But I think there is one more point about it. I think I heard somewhere on a Joe Rogan podcast or somewhere where he mentioned that, why do we have this intrinsic nature of updating ourselves every time? We want better phones, we want better cars, we want better life every day, every second we want to improve our lives, right? So how did that nature came into us? No animal wants to do that. No other being wants to do that. They are just part of evolution and evolved into what they are today. But we are not just evolving, we are sort of upgrading ourselves every time.
Yeah, I think that's very, very obvious. That, again, what I mentioned right at the beginning is we have self-awareness. We are aware of ourselves as acting beings. We are aware of our mortality, and animals aren't. We are aware of the quality of life. We can compare the quality of life that we have versus other people. We can imagine how we can improve the quality of our lives. These are all things that animals can't do. They cannot think abstractly at anywhere near the level that we can. And it's because of our ability to think abstractly, we can imagine better futures. We can, see how we can actually shape the world by acting in the world. And, to touch on a topic that tends to be quite controversial is free will. That's essentially what I think the useful definition of free will is: our ability to make decisions while understanding that our decisions affect the world, that the decision we make, if we make this decision, it will cause, likely to cause one thing in the world. If we make a different decision, it's likely to change the world in a different way. And that we can make decisions with awareness of the consequences, or the likely consequences, and the fact that we are the agent, that our thought processes, the conclusion of our thought process will make a difference in the world. Right. And it is to that extent that we take responsibility for our actions, because we can anticipate the likely outcome. So it's all of these things, and the ability to, as I say, imagine a better future, to be aware of our mortality, and all of those things combined with a reptile brain that wants us to, survive and reproduce. And this is why culture is built. We create cultural institutions that allow us to cooperate and so on. And I think, that's wonderful. And, I don't know if the listeners are aware of Maslow's hierarchy,
Yeah.
but, Maslow has this hierarchy of needs that human beings have. And the most basic needs are to be fed, to have food. And, and then there come levels of hierarchy. And as you satisfy each level, you have food, you have shelter, you have family, you have security. You get to a point where you basically then are aiming for bigger things in life. How can I flourish? How can I make things better in the world for myself, for other people? And it's sort of a natural progression. As our more basic needs are fulfilled, our ability to solve problems then gets pointed at these, bigger problems, basically, that we see that don't affect our well-being directly, but uplift us and uplift humanity.
Right. Fantastic. Great point there. Can I then ask you about language? Do you think that other than us, any other species might also create languages for themselves? Because as far as we are the conscious beings, and with consciousness comes, because of language comes consciousness, as per what I've read a lot. Because without communicating with you, how am I able to transfer my thoughts, which are there in my head, without actually being able to communicate it to you through a language? So do you think that other species could have developed that kind of capability as well?
Yeah. So it's the same answer that I gave earlier, in the difference between animal intelligence and our intelligence, or the ability of animals to form concepts versus our ability to form concepts. So we can create and manipulate very abstract concepts where one word can refer to a whole huge area of knowledge, in the other person's mind. If I say, let me use something that is probably still controversial for most people, but if I say Donald Trump, immediately that lights up a whole lot of, references and knowledge and so in your brain, which are high level concepts, related to of what you might like or dislike or heard or rumors or, whatever it might be. So that is the power of abstract concepts and communicating in them. So we have a word, Donald Trump is one word. Now, I could say the same thing for communism, or capitalism, and it'll light up a whole range of different knowledge and emotions and so on. Now, animals can't do that to the extent that they can communicate in language. And I really use quotes there because it's not at all the same language that we are talking about as humans. They are, again, concrete-bound symbols where you might have a symbol, or a word like you can train a dog to fetch. It's basically that symbol directly triggers an action. Or even the most advanced experiments that have been done with parrots, that seem quite impressive, where they can discern different colors and shapes and sort them and so on. Again, the important thing is these are concrete bound. So it's things they can actually perceive. The level of abstraction is almost non-existent in animal language. And they certainly can't build a hierarchy of abstract concepts that we can. And, then you have very sophisticated grammar in human language, that isn't found in animals. So no, it's very, very different. One can cherry pick and find particular examples, of where, where dolphin or somebody communicated in something that seems to be much more advanced, but one needs to be very careful that we are not reading more into it than strictly what the data suggests.
Right. Great, fantastic answer. Thank you. Right, last question, I promise.
Okay.
Are we alone in the universe, or do you think that there are more intelligent civilizations in the universe, present in the universe, but we can never reach them, and they can also never reach us because of the vastness of space? So What is your opinion of that?
Yes. So, I mean, I can't even begin to wrap my mind around how many galaxies and stars there are. When I read the numbers, my eyes just glaze over. I mean, I can't comprehend what those numbers are and how many planets there are and solar systems and so on. It's totally beyond my ability to, comprehend or relate to, I should say. But if I look at the numbers, is it likely that there are other planets that have created intelligence? I would think so. I mean, almost certainly, with what we know now, how life started, I mean, we have some pretty good guesses by now of how life started. Could there be the same conditions on another planet somewhere? It would seem pretty likely with the sheer number of them that there are. But would there be within our light cone? That's, again, probably extremely unlikely, because when you look at how long, Earth has been around and how long we've been able to communicate potentially with the outside world, I mean, it's a tiny, tiny percentage. It's completely off the charts how little of our, existence as of life on Earth, what tiny percentage of time we've been able to communicate. And how long do civilizations last? Well, we don't know. On a bad day, I think we might not last very much longer. And on a good day, if we have AGI to guide us, then hopefully we can last a really long time. But still, to have the light cones intersect between us of what we can communicate or receive and some other civilization in another galaxy far, far away, chances are pretty slim.
Fantastic. Great answer. And I also love the fact that you brought AGI into it, the best way to end it. Yeah. Thank you, Peter. I had so much fun, just like last time. And I will listen to this again and again. And I'm pretty sure many people would also do that.
Great.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I enjoyed it. I don't often get time to just talk about these things, philosophy. And so that was great. Thank you.
Right. I'm pretty sure in your work, every day you might be just working on, building the great chatbot with brains and, artificial intelligence. But it's great to sometimes take you out of topic and just try to understand what is your opinion of universe, what is your opinion of reality and all.
Yes, I spend almost all of my time on improving chatbot with a brain to make it more and more intelligent so that it can help enterprise and individuals.
Fantastic. Great job. Thank you, Peter. It is a pleasure and honor to have you here. And maybe in future we will connect again for another episode.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. Please support this podcast by liking, commenting, sharing it with your friends, and also subscribing to this channel. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.